And from Matthew, starting at chapter 9, verse 35. And Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every infirmity. And when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them, because they were harassed and helpless, like a sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Pray therefore that the Lord of the harvest to send the laborers into the harvest. And he called to him his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every disease and every infirmity. And the names of the 12 apostles were these. First, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew his brother, and James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, and Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, Simon the Cananean, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. The 12 Jesus sent out, charging them, go nowhere among the Gentiles, and enter no town of the Samaritans, but gather to the lost sheep the house of Israel, and preach as you go, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. You received without paying, give without pay. Take no gold, nor silver, nor copper in your belts, no bag for your money, nor 2 tunics, nor sandals, nor staff, for the laborer deserves his food. Friends, this is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
There was probably nobody in our history like the great Albert Einstein. You know, he, at first when he was growing up, nobody thought he would amount to anything. He quit school because he couldn't manage himself in school. He took a job, and then something happened to him. He realized, his true potential, and he became the father of modern math and physics and things like that. And his name has been espoused all by countless millions. And one time he was asked the question, what is the greatest force on earth? And he looked that person dead in the eye and he said, compound interest. Well, if you don't know what compound interest is, turn to the person beside you. They'll tell you all about it. But, wealth building wealth. Benjamin Franklin wanted to prove this as well. And when he was alive, he decided to give a lot of his money to the city of Philadelphia. And with the proviso that it would be, gotten into something like 200 years later. It's called the Franklin Fund. And today it funds so many wonderful projects in Pennsylvania and beyond. And compound interest, they both believed in it very highly. Now, I'm not going to talk about money this morning, but I do want to talk about the power of multiplication. Not of money, but of leadership. Leadership is one of those things that an organization cannot do without. With it, an organization could grow like wildfire. It's not the only thing, of course, but it's very important. Reverend Samuel Davies was a young man who grew up in Pennsylvania. He grew up on a farm, and at an early age, he felt God's calling to be a minister. And you can read about Reverend Samuel Davies. If you look him up, you'll find it. He became a Presbyterian minister in Pennsylvania. But what he really wanted to do was to be a minister in the Virginia colonies. It was that time. Well, the Virginia colonies was the Church of England. And they didn't allow other religions down there doing religious stuff. Well, it so happened he got a license to preach. He was the only one who was actually licensed in the Virginia colony, who was not Church of England, to preach in that area. So there's this whole big story of him going down there, nearly getting killed a couple times for that. He was really an extraordinary person. He was just a regular person, but he was really extraordinary. Well, he went down there and he began to preach, and he had a wonderful ministry. He preached out in the wilderness, and thousands of people came to hear him preach. He was just that good, you know. And then he settled down, and they built a church for him, and he started preaching regularly, and he started teaching the people and the children and things like that. And then he decided, he saw all the slavery that was around him at that time. Slavery was everywhere. It was at the peak, you know. And he wanted to do something. During this time, you could not speak out publicly against slavery. That would just get you killed. So he went to the slave owners, who were people in his church, and he said he wondered if he could be allowed to teach slaves to read. And they loved their minister, and they said, sure, that'd be fine. So they sent just a few slaves, like 5 or 6, that sort of thing. And it was, he and his wife started to teach them to read. But here was the difference. His ministry was called the Pole Green, by the way, if you want to look it up. He wanted to improve slaves' lives, and I think he really wanted to free them, but he couldn't do that right then. So over the next years, he began to teach slaves to read. But what he did was something different. When you came to him and his wife to learn to read, the deal was this, and it was not told to the landowners, slaveholders. You were to learn to read, and then you were to go and teach 5 other people to learn to read. And in turn, they were to teach another 5. And so 5 became 25, 25 became 125, and 125 became 625. It worked. Within a few years, people began to notice all over that the slaves in their area could read, but they couldn't figure out how it happened. And Reverend Davies had sown these wonderful seeds, you know, that would one day help people towards freedom. You know, if you needed to go somewhere, you had to be able to read signs. You had to be able to read letters, all kinds of things. And reading, well, they always say reading is fundamental, but it's a wonderful, wonderful thing that he did. The power of multiplication. You know, in some ways, Jesus did the same thing. He knew there was no way he could do this on his own. So Jesus chooses 12 disciples to train. And as far as we understand, he took them on a 3-year training mission. And he taught them everything he thought they would need. And he didn't stop there. He took on 70 more, the New Testament tells us. And he teaches them and he sends them out. And Jesus was very successful. His students went out, his disciples and the 70. They went out and did amazing things. And they were faithful, they were fearless, they were successful. And they were just regular, everyday people, you know. They weren't special in so many ways. They were just people. And I worked at a Billy Graham crusade one time in Pittsburgh about 30 years ago when Billy was still doing crusades. And I heard Billy Graham say this. He said that if he had a crusade every night of his life, and this was over 30 years ago, and people came forward in the thousands to accept Christ, he said there's no way he could reach the world for Christ. He could not reach enough people. It wouldn't happen. But he said, if one Christian introduced 2 people to Christ, and those 2 people introduced each 2 people to Christ and carry on, he said, we would evangelize the world in 30 years. The power of multiplication. And you have to remember, Jesus never traveled very far. Israel was just 60 miles wide by about 200 miles long. And Israel is the size, you know, one of our states, that sort of thing. And one day the disciples, he's thinking about his country and maybe the whole world and his future ministry, and he says to them, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. And he says, pray to the Lord that he'll send out workers into the harvest. I think that is why we are so excited for John this morning and for many others who are entering the ministry or doing ministry in whatever capacity in the life of God's church throughout the world. You know, there's a lot happening, and we are all invited to be part of it. And I think this is a prayer that we need to be praying today in our church, right here in Cadiz, Ohio. There's a great harvest out there, but it needs more workers. We need to be training leaders, workers. We need to be good workers and leaders ourselves. And you might be saying to yourself this morning, self, what in the world can I do? I'm just one person in a pew. How can I make a difference? I'm not special. I'm not a minister. How in the world can I help? I always think of the man who started the free wheelchair mission, Don Schoendorfer, and a man who didn't really care about church. You know, he lived for himself. He was a medical engineer. He made medical equipment. One day he sees a lady pulling herself across the road on her hands because she can't walk. And he says to himself, this is in India, he says, I can make a wheelchair for that person. He makes 2 wheelchairs, takes them over, gives them away, and he is radically changed. And now he serves Christ throughout the world, giving out wheelchairs. He preaches in churches every Sunday. And he says, I never, ever thought I'd be doing something like this. Gave up everything, and he follows Christ. And it's a beautiful story. If you want to look it up, it's called the Free Wheelchair Mission. I've talked about it before. It's really neat in a lot of ways. You don't have to be perfect to be a leader. First, all you have to be is willing to do the work and step out and try. And you might say, too, nobody is going to follow me. Oh, well, maybe, but look, think about this. God has a place for everyone. Don't worry about that. God will make whatever happen. Jesus did not call perfect people, and so we're going to fit right in. Peter was a fisherman. He was a hard man, no real training. He was loud. He was too self-assured. He fell over his feet more times than people could count. Matthew, who he called, was a hated tax collector. He was at the bottom of the barrel socially. Nobody wanted this guy. But he was smart. He can use all kinds. Doesn't matter where you've been or what you've done. He can use you. Jesus was concerned that the Father send workers out into the fields. So the question I have to ask myself is, am I working at something in God's kingdom? If you're not, then find a place. A lot of people get stuck at this point, and they know that they need to find a place, but they feel like I'm not ready, or I don't know where to go, or as soon as I'm ready, I'll head off, that sort of thing. And if you say things like this to yourself, you'll never be ready, and that's true. You will never learn enough. You'll never get enough experience. Sometimes I think the only way to do it is to jump in the deep end, and start swimming. Of course, a lot of times people say, don't jump in the deep end, you'll drown. Sometimes that happens. Well, anyway, but we need to get in the water at least. But if you wait till you're ready, you won't be ready. And Jesus said, I will be with you always. I will lead you. I know, too, that people are afraid of failure. Man, the fear of failure has kept so many people from fulfilling dreams, doing great works, and so on. And somewhere along the way, I don't know if we have to learn not to be afraid or somehow to move forward even though we are afraid, that sort of thing. And I've always liked what the angels have said when they have come from God to speak to people. The very first thing they say is, what? Don't be afraid. You know, my mom once told me that, I was going to be a good minister, but my brother Howard, maybe you'll meet him someday. Howard and I look very similar. When you see us together, you'll know we're brothers. But Howard tells the best stories. I mean, he would be the best preaching minister of all, but Howard has often told me he has no patience with people. He just tells it like it is too straight, you know what I mean? He'd be like this. Yeah, I know what the problem is. You're an idiot. Stuff like that. Howard works now in retirement in the electrical section at the Home Depot. And Howard is a professional electrician. And as you know, electric's very expensive. And people come in there and they say the craziest stuff. And Howard just, he comes home with the wildest stories, but he tries to be nice. I'm not sure he's always nice, but it is funny. And, no, you can't do that. Why? Because you'll kill yourself. That's why. Well, so each of us has our own place. No matter how old you get, you can find a field to work in. And Jesus is already there somewhere in that field. I watch some of our older folks who move off into nursing homes, and it's easy to think that life has passed us by, but I see more and more of our members being active in those places, and continuing seeing wherever they are as a place of God's working, God's field. Friends, let us be about the work of the Lord. Let us be a place of training ever new leaders for God's church, God's mission and God's ministry here and around the world. And we start with the prayer, just like Jesus told us. Pray to the Father to send more workers into the field. And let us train and equip them and send them out. I'm not sure what all this means, but the Lord knows where he needs people. Let us be praying as Jesus asked. Let us pray. Oh, Father, be with us this day. As we are here this morning and have heard the readings, heard the message, and we pray that you will send workers into the field, for the fields are ripe with harvest. Even today, we're moving on in this month of August, and we know that very soon that the corn and the vegetables and all things will be ripening. And just like that, we know that people need you in great, powerful ways. And the Lord, help us that we may go out among them and be your people. We give you thanks, and all God's children said.